Welcome to Clear the Air with me, Angela Lim, medical doctor and co-founder of Clearhead, an innovative employee wellbeing platform. Clear the Air is a podcast covering those experiences in your life or questions you have that you feel too vulnerable to share with those around you, such as, why do I feel so lonely? And what can I do to feel happier? We get real and raw on these existential questions on mental health and well-being that's puzzled humans for millennia, sharing the science behind what you're experiencing and the answers behind those questions. Historically, the unspoken organisational culture meant that your personal issues and any mental health challenges you are experiencing were expected to stay at home. Today, it is increasingly accepted for employees to be more open about their mental health and well-being needs in the workplace. However, with the increasing prevalence and severity of mental illness in the community, this presents new challenges for HR and managers to know how to navigate these conversations empathetically while maintaining a focus on the organization's performance. In today's episode, we want to focus on our HR audience. And so we have invited special guest host, HR professional Lisa Young, who will be interviewing Clearhead's clinical lead and clinical psychologist, Barry Kirker. Together, they will unpack all the complexities surrounding employees' mental health. And with that, I'll pass you on to Lisa Young.
So for those of you who do know me, I am Lisa Young. I am the founder of HRHQ, which is an HR for HR platform. So it's an education and community platform for HR professionals. And I am here today because this is something that comes up a lot for me in my work with clients, a lot for my members. It comes up a lot in our membership forums and discussions. So today we're here to unpack common mental health challenges that we as HR and also leaders encounter in the workplace. So as HR, we're often supporting the leaders in these scenarios, and as leaders, you're often the front line as well. So really important that we both are equipped with how to deal with these situations. Now look, full disclosure, as you all know, I am not a psychologist. I am not a counselor. And truth be told, I'm not even very experienced in this area. So I am here because, like most of you, I'm often the one sitting across the table from someone in crisis or struggling with their mental health, or I'm getting a phone call from a leader or a client having those challenges. And most of the time, I also struggle to know exactly what to do. So to help us today, we do have someone who is a subject matter expert. We do have somebody who is here today to fill that clinical expertise and perspective that I and we in HR as leaders don't have. Barry's with us today. Barry is a clinical psychologist at Clearhead. Thank you so much for your time today, Barry. I know it's going to be such an incredible discussion. Can you start, I guess, by telling us a little bit about you and get us all on the same page?
Certainly. Well, hello, everybody, and thanks for having me here today, Lisa. So yeah, as Lisa said, I'm a clinical psychologist, and I have been for about 30 years now. Over my time, I've worked in different settings, seen all different types of people, and I've always had a particular interest in mental health and using clinical psychology in the workplace. And currently, I'm the clinical lead at Clearhead, and we'll talk a little bit Clearhead, I guess, throughout the session, but as we're an EAP provider who does other services as well. It's sort of a different type of EAP provider, and I've worked in EAP before a number of years in Australia and New Zealand. And I'm really enjoying this current role at Clearhead, and particularly how sort of stuff we're going to do today, how to help HR managers and other people deal with the difficult situations to deal with mental health in the workplace.
Awesome. And I guess 30 years, you've probably seen a lot of shifts in the way that we talk about and that we address mental health, especially in the workplace as well. That's awesome.
Yes, absolutely.
Very cool. Well, we are going to be covering a lot today. I know I've got my notepad here ready. I am ready to learn. I do know that following this session, you will be able to share some resources with us. I know you're going to be sharing some great frameworks, some lists of, certain questions and scenarios and stuff. So instead of everyone, panic scrolling with their note taking, then we will be able to share some resources as well. Again, I just want to say that we have people joining the session and catching the recording from all over the world. So I just want to be clear today that we're talking about the employee experience and how to support our employees. We're not going to be touching today on legal requirements or employment laws, because as I said before, the human experience is pretty universal, but our laws and regulations certainly are not. And just for your reference, Barry and I, if you haven't caught from our accents, are based in New Zealand, and as you mentioned before, in Auckland. So if we do touch on anything, we're talking at it from a New Zealand perspective. I also do just want to note that some of this stuff we'll be discussing today, some of the scenarios may be heavy and involve some sensitive topics. We'll be talking about things like crisis situations and suicide. So if you do find this discussion tough or it's affecting you, please take care of yourself and seek support. If you need to leave the call, the recording will be available when you're ready. So why are we here? Look, mental health struggles are showing up more and more in the workplace, and truth be told, in all areas of our lives. And in the workplace, it's landing on HR and leaders' desks far more often. And the reality is that most of us haven't been trained for this. You know, as an HR professional, I can find myself face to face with someone who's in crisis, someone who may desperately need support. And unlike you, Barry, I don't have the qualifications, the clinical skills, or the experience to know exactly how to help that person. You know, things like depression and anxiety and, you know, suicidal thoughts are not things that I remember in any of my HR papers or my HR studies. So the challenge is that this is a reality that we face far too often in the workplace. So the objective today is really simple. We want to give HR and leaders more confidence in handling mental health challenges that might arise at work. So I'd just love to get one more question. Feel free to jump in the chat. Tell me, does your business have an EAP provider? Yes or no? Yes, we do. Yes, yes, yes. Amazing. Oh, someone said Clearhead. Woohoo. Now, one reason I asked that question though too is because the EAP provider, it's, you know, as HR and as leaders, even if we ourselves are not dealing or struggling with our own mental health challenges, it's a really great resource for us as well to seek support and guidance on how to support other people. So I would be keen to hear one last question. Who here has contacted an EAP provider in your capacity as an HR or leader to get support for somebody else? Quite a few people that I speak to don't even think to do that or know that that's an option. So services like Clearhead, they have manager support lines, I understand. I've done it myself many, many times. Hey, this is Lisa calling from X business. I have an employee who's just come to me and said XYZ. I'm really out of my depth here. I'm not too sure what to say. Can you give me some help? You know, that's what they're there for. They're there to support us. And I know that Clearhead has a manager support line as well. So what we're going to do today is essentially, I guess, role play a little bit, right? Like, I'm the HR person. I don't know what to do. We have an incredible, expert here, Barry, who does have the experience and the qualifications to be able to give advice. So this could be, essentially what it would be like, the experience of giving that manager support line a call or giving EAP a call and getting that guidance. So what we're going to do today is walk through some common workplace scenarios with you. These are scenarios I've been in many times myself. I know that most of you will have dealt with this, or maybe you're worried that you may have to deal with it. So very cool that you're here proactively. Before we get into discussing mental health challenges and how they show up in the workplace, Barry, I'd be really interested to hear from you. Can you explain what it actually means when someone is struggling with their mental health or experiencing mental health challenges? Because I know the term can be used quite loosely in the workplace, but what does it actually mean from a clinical perspective?
Absolutely. So from a clinical perspective, we look at mental health as being on a continuum. So you've got wellness, which is a very popular term these days, wellness or normal functioning on one end, positive functioning on one end of the continuum. And at the other end of the continuum, you've got mental illness or unwellness. And depending on how severe that is, of the negative end of the continuum, if you like, then people have got a diagnosis, a mental health condition they can be diagnosed for. Like a little bit complicated because some conditions are chronic. The chronic conditions are conditions like we heard of, like bipolar, schizophrenia, and you can even look at like ADHD like that. These are chronic conditions, and then people's mental health moves along the continuum depending on stress and things that happen with those conditions. And then you have what we call acute conditions, which don't always last. Something might happen, that there's an onsetting condition, and then they go back to their normal functioning. So the key thing, I suppose, is changes in functioning and then the various symptoms that are brought on when people have mental health challenges or issues.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. It just shows again how it's not always black and white, much like we experience in our HR lives as well. And I like the idea of seeing it as a continuum, because I guess it's, some instances, like I will talk about later, where maybe the person's maybe just not doing so well, and other ends where they may be in crisis or dealing with much more heavier things, to the point that they're maybe getting medical support or medication and things like that. So that's really helpful. Thank you. All right. Well, look, I guess let's just jump into our scenarios. So a lot of people in HR will have dealt with these situations. My first scenario is actually probably the least common, but maybe the easiest. And that is when an employee self-discloses. So sometimes an employee will actually take the step to come forward themselves and tell their manager or HR that they're struggling with their mental health. And it's obviously a very daunting discussion for both parties, to be honest. So in that moment, as HR or as the leader who the person has come to and trusted with that information, what is the best way to respond to them? What should we do or say?
Yep, totally. Well, I'd say the first thing, Lisa, is everyone should do is just to make sure it's the right time for them to sit down with that person and talk to them. So do what I call a scan of yourself. How are you feeling? Are you in the right emotional state to be able to sit down to what, because you're not sure where that conversation is going to go. And of course, you're not sure how long it's going to go for either. So if you've got to rush off somewhere soon, probably not the best time to have that conversation. So that'll be the first thing. Scan yourself, make sure you're in the right place mentally, and also you've got enough time. And then I'd summarize what you do next is kind of three things. Obviously listening, which I know everyone hopefully can do, and it's really what we call a do no harm approach. So you're never going to do any harm by listening to somebody. Also, the other thing you want to do is collect information, really understand what's going on in terms of the mental health. And then thirdly, you want to make a plan of action to do something about it. So listening, collect information, and make a plan of action. You're not going to cause any harm. You're not going to make any problem worse by doing those things. And sometimes we get asked, what sort of questions could you ask? And so I always say a good question to start with is, and these are some of the questions that we would ask as mental health people, but also that everybody can ask, like, how long have you been feeling this way? Is always a good question to ask. Do you know what brought it on? You always ask, do you know what brought it on? Because if you say what brought it on, then the person feels like they should know, and they don't always know, of course, what made them feel that way. But do you know what brought it on? And you can help them with some suggestions. Hey, has something happened? Have you had an adverse event? Or you're under particular stress at the moment? You might ask them, what areas of your life is it affecting? And obviously, you're particularly interested in work because that's what you're there for. So you might even say, like, is it affecting your work, this? And odds are it is, because that's why it's been raised, because it's something's affecting your work. It's really important too to see what sort of support they've got, because obviously you're going to feel that you want to support them, of course, naturally, but you want to first check, who have they got in their life? So who's at home? It's always a good question, who's at home? And then you can find out if you've got a partner or other family members, etc., who can support them. And then you'd also not a bad idea to refer them to their own resources. So what do you normally do to manage stress? What do you normally do when you cope this way? And then the last bit, and it's a nice segue into the EAP, is, have you been getting professional support? And asking that. It's okay to ask them the question. You can then go on, talk about how EAP might help, but also obviously saying, is there anything that I can do? Is there anything we can do in the workplace? So really just having a conversation with them, allowing for as long as it takes, and then making sure all the conversation ends, you've got a plan of where you go to from here with it.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. And so let's say maybe we feel confronted ourselves. Maybe we are not, feeling equipped to have the conversation. What do you think is maybe that's just the one question or the minimum thing that you could do in that situation?
Yeah. So just don't ask so many questions. Just sitting there listening, trying to collect information, and then making a time for you yourself to see them at another time. Or so again, that one question, I suppose, who have you got? The most important question is, who have you got, supporting you and offering professional help? Because that way you can be rest assured that even if you can't talk to them for now, or you're not in the right space to talk to them, that there is somebody who can, or there's going to be some follow-up for them until you can sit down properly and talk to them.
Okay, awesome. And are there things that we should not say, that we should avoid saying or doing?
Yes, there is. Like I said, with the do no harm approach, listening, collecting information, but there is sometimes people try and think they're helping by going a bit too far. So some of the things you shouldn't do is give a strong opinion. So, and you're giving a strong opinion, I suppose, if you're using language like should or must. And common scenario, for example, might be you might have a female client who's disclosing issues in her relationship, and you might even think, just sounds like an abusive relationship. But you wouldn't say, look, you should leave this person, you should leave him. That would be an example of what you shouldn't do because you don't know all the complexities of it. But you can show empathy by saying, well, it sounds like you're in a difficult situation, or what a tricky situation to be in, or that doesn't sound nice at all. That's fine, showing empathy, but just don't give any strong opinions like advice, like leave him or you should call the police or anything. Because like I said, you don't know, that can go down badly. Also, don't do too much self-disclosure. Now, I know it's tempting sometimes, especially if you're had a similar experience, maybe to use self-disclosure as a way to connect and help the person. But the problem about that, even if it's well-intended, that the other person might actually think your self-disclosure means you're making it more about you than them. And they say, hey, it's about me. I don't want to hear about your bad relationship, even though I've got one that you might understand. And also, that could be a problem down the track, because if you do too much self-disclosure down the track, when you have to be more firm about things like boundaries in terms of your performance issues or whatever, that could be a bit tricky because you've sort of, shared a bit too much maybe. So I'd encourage you to be careful about how much is this self-disclosure. I'd also say don't make too many promises. Don't say, well, we'll sort it out, everything's going to be okay, or no matter what happens, you're always going to have your job. Don't sort of make any sort of promises, because obviously you've got no control of where you can keep them. Certainly don't tell them. I've heard cases where people have been crying, they've been told to stop crying. Obviously wouldn't do that. And all the people are hysterical and you tell them to calm down. I wouldn't recommend that either. Just let them calm down naturally, or let them the way you're talking to them will help calm them down anyway. It's impossible for someone to be hysterical for too long. They eventually will come down on their own accord, with your support. So those sort of things. And also the other thing to be careful about is not to reinforce any poor coping strategies that do have. Like, for example, they might say, look, I just want to go home and drink a lot tonight. That's the way I feel. And you go, yeah, that always works for me, having a couple of wines after a tough day. I want to be careful of saying something like that, because that might reinforce using alcohol, which, as we know, is not a helpful coping strategy. And especially if the coping strategy is something really poor, like hurting themselves, then you certainly don't want to show any support for anything like that.
Yeah, wow, okay. And how do we assess the risk in that moment? Maybe we're lucky and they have said that I'm in crisis and I am contemplating suicide. Maybe they've given us that level of information. If so, how do we deal with that? But also, what if we think it might be? We think, gosh, this person is really in trouble here. How do we assess the risk, and what do we say to someone that we think might be a risk to themselves or others?
Yes, absolutely. And so we've got some specific questions we recommend to ask about risk, and I think those are the one that sort of resources the handouts will provide later on. But I always find a good segue to get in for just generally chatting about them and then getting into talking about their risk is asking the question, how bad has it got? Because that's sort of normally code for it. Have you ever thought about it? So that's a nice thing. But how bad have things got? Or how badly do you feel at the moment? And then you can always quantify it on the 1 to 10 scale, like 10's being the worst you can feel. And then you would just naturally follow on to ask them specifically about suicide. And I really want to emphasize here that you're not going to make it worse, okay? You're not going to make it more likely to commit suicide if you ask them about it. You're not going to make them sow the seed. Yeah, actually, I should do it because we've just been chatting about it. This is totally not going to happen. So I want to reassure everybody, again, it's a do no harm approach by asking some more specific questions if you feel comfortable about suicide. And so sort of questions look at the way we assess risk. So we ask questions about how they might do it, because that's also one of the things when you assess risk. You want to know if they've actually got a specific plan. So you would ask them, look, have you thought about how you would do it? And if they say, yes, I'm going to hang myself or I'm going to shoot myself, then the follow-up question would be, have you got access to a gun? Have you got ropes? Or if they say they're going to take an overdose on pills, okay, what pills do you have at the moment? So you get really quite specific in those questions, and they go, well, actually, no, I don't have. Then you can, I'm going to breathe a bit better, where if it's looking like they're actually got means and they're actually going to act on it soon, then you'd have to do more. So you go and find out more about the means and how imminent using the means might be by asking questions. Another question you go, so you're always thinking about it, or is just occasionally you're thinking about it? Because that also shows you how much you need to be worried. And then you also try and steer them towards protective factors by asking questions like, well, who would be impacted if you were to kill yourself? Who would be impacted? And if they say something like, oh, I guess my kids would be, you would go, well, yeah, I think they would be, And so just trying to make them feel a little bit guilty, if you like, about that's probably not a good idea because it's not going to be good for your kid, or who else might be impacted. And so that's leading the way to protective factors. And then finally, you actually look at their history, because if they tried this before, they're more at risk. So you might actually even explicitly ask them again, if you feel comfortable, to have you actually tried to kill yourself before? And if they go yes, then again, you want to get a bit more detail. Well, what happened? How come it didn't work out? The more relaxed you can be about it, that's going to make a reality check for them. And again, I emphasize it's not going to make it worse. If you're very comfortable talking about suicide in a very matter-of-fact way, that's not going to make any difference to their risk. And in fact, if you work, if you ever unfortunately, if you had to ring up the crisis service yourself and ask them about this is what you get, people that are very matter-of-fact asking these questions, and reality check, and it's just comfortable, and like I said, it's not going to do any harm.
Yeah, wow, that's so true. I've personally had to phone those services for a friend of mine, and I did think, whoa, like they were so almost blunt, and now that it was probably the best thing we needed in that moment.
Yes, of course, because they do it all the time, whereas I'm sure you'll bring your own personality to it, your own style. What's really important is that you're really real, so that the person who's distressed wants to see someone who's really real and authentic. It doesn't need to be like a checklist when you ask these questions. You're just doing it in your own way. Use your own language. If it's a little bit awkward, that's fine as well. If you're a little bit awkward because, that's not the sort of thing you're used to asking, and the other person will appreciate. They'll appreciate the thought. They're not going to go, oh, well, she was awkward as she asked me that question, because of course she's going to be. So you can't go wrong. Even if you get the words don't come out right, that's all okay as well. The other person knows that you're concerned and you're doing the right thing by them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I'll be honest, what you've just said is confronting, like the thought of asking those questions to another person. Maybe some people here right now are listening are thinking, there's no way I could ask those questions. There's no way I could have that conversation. And we will touch on a little bit later, we will touch on escalating and seeking further support and stuff. What if you can feel your own emotion taking over in the conversation? How do you stay matter of fact? Do you have any thoughts there?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think, again, you've got to be really real. So I think it's okay to say, wow, this is finding this quite hard, and I realize I am not the best person probably to be talking to you about this now. I really appreciate you sharing, how you feel, and I want to help you, but I'm just thinking at the moment, I'm not the best person, so I want to really encourage you to use other services, and that would lead into, bringing in other services. Because, I'm amazed sometimes how HR managers have actually literally walked people down to hospitals and things like that and called up, like you said, crisis services. And that's not for everybody. And so that's why you utilize your EAP. We can take urgent calls at any stage. At Clearhead, we'll take an urgent call from you saying, look, I've got someone with me. They say they're going to harm themselves. I'm finding myself getting overwhelmed by that. And we'll certainly can assist from that situation. So you don't have to sit with that, just have to sit with that if you're not sure what to do.
In that moment, would you allow us to contact you and actually put you on speakerphone with the person?
Absolutely. That's right. We've had that situation happen. They're exactly right. Well, they actually said, look, I've got someone beside me right now. They've told me this, but, and I'll say, right, yeah, we'll help them then. Because obviously, one of the reasons of asking all those questions about suicide too is you need to make a judgment. Do I want this person to leave my office right now? Do I want them to go right home now? Or do I need to do something? And so if you're starting to get alarm bells, it's a sign that you don't want them to actually leave straight away and not do anything about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I had an employee a couple of years ago who actually came to me and said, I don't think I can go home. I can't be alone. I can't be alone with my thoughts. I don't trust myself. And he just refused to go home from work. And I was very, very lucky in that moment that my colleague, who happened to be on site at the same time, was a trained mental health counsellor. So I was very lucky then that I had someone to support me. But I truthfully don't know what I would have done or said on reflection now in that moment. So it's tough. It's really tough. And like I said, we will definitely talk some more about escalating soon. I just had one more question on this scenario. We've had somebody come to us. Maybe they're not at crisis. Maybe they're just saying, I'm really down at the moment. I'm really struggling with, anxiety or feeling anxious or whatever. A lot going on personally. Are there any subtle cues in behavior or language that can indicate the level of support that someone might need if they're not explicitly telling us?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. And my short answer to that is no, I would say, because some people present much more hysterically and dramatically, and people start worrying about them more than the person who actually who doesn't. And so I would say the key thing to think about this is the change. How is this person normally? And if they're quite different to how they normally are from what you know of them, then you should be more concerned. So that would be the main sign or symptom I would look for is, how different they are, how much they change. It's normally someone who's quite out there and then they start being very dramatic about how they're feeling, and I wouldn't necessarily be too concerned about it. But more specific you can be in the information you collect, the better idea you will get, from how worried you have to be about them.
Yeah, wow. Okay, no, that's really helpful. And we'll explore that a bit more a little bit later, talking about escalating. But I'd like to jump into another scenario now. This one, again, something I've dealt with before, not as common, but what if somebody else notices something's off? Either it's us or maybe a leader comes to us. Maybe the managers come and said, look, I've noticed this change in their behavior, their mood, or even performance. They're not their normal self. What's the best way for the manager? And I think I'd be, most people here would be in agreement that the manager should be having that discussion, not HR. But what's the best way for a manager to raise this with an employee? And how can we create that space where they feel comfortable opening up if they are experiencing mental health challenges? Yeah.
So, I suppose you start off just hoping that, you just say to them, how are you going? How's everything at the moment? And that's all, everything, well, you ask, everything's fine. And you go, right. Then you say, well, hey, I need to talk to you about some things that I've observed or what have been observed by others. So you focus on what's been observed. Again, be really specific in what you tell them. So, for example, I heard you're swearing after you got off the phone with that client. It's not normally like you. Or, I saw you crying after that phone call. Or someone saw you crying. Or in a case that I had recently, some staff members came to the man and said, look, so-and-so's they've been cutting themselves in the toilet, there's blood, and I said they're self-harming in the toilet. So you say, look, you've been noticed by some people that you've done that. So you really focus on specifically what's been seen. Or, hey, I noticed that when I was talking the other day, you didn't respond. You seem to be daydreaming or distracted. Yeah, how are you? Are you okay? So you give them the behaviours you observed, and then you go from there. Now, sometimes they will go, yes, no, okay, fair enough, and it's been noticed, and they'll talk about other times they won't. So then you go to the next level with it.
Yeah, wow. Okay, now I had a similar one where we saw on security footage an employee harming themselves with a box cutter in a warehouse environment, and that was awful. That the manager felt completely out of their depth. We knew we had to say something, but yeah, it was really, really challenging. So that's really helpful. I think, I guess we're really good at this in HR. We should be really good at this in HR because we deal with this when it comes to investigations and forming allegations. We're not focusing on subjective information. We need to be really factual. So instead of you've been aggressive, you're being rude, it is what does that look like? You raised your voice and stepped into their personal space. You said X, you did Y, getting really factual. And I think that's the key here is not bringing emotion to it, not bringing judgment into it, just for stating the facts of the matter. I think so important. So that's awesome. Thank you. And should we bring up, we'll talk about formal processes soon, but if it is impacting their performance in that moment, should we bring that up or should we stay completely focusing on the individual struggling? Because my thinking is that maybe we're starting to make it about us when in that first conversation, we really should be hitting that duty of care, health and safety type discussion. What are your thoughts there?
Yes, I think I mostly agree with that. I'm assuming you're going to see them more than once, right? So, and there's going to be a follow-up. So I think that first session absolutely should just be what we're talking about before, focused on then listening, collecting information. But I think though, I would say there's two messages you want to try and give them. One is that, hey, I'm here to support you, but hey, we will need to be talking about what this means for your work performance. So I think you need to flag it at that first session before they leave. You want them to go away thinking, no worries, everything's good. You want them to think, well, look, yeah, I've got to do something about this because it's going to affect my performance. And also, I think you also want to flag with them, hey, I've got to worry not just about you, but I've got to worry about everybody else. I've got a duty of care through health and safety for everybody else in the workplace. So I think if you can somehow get those messages in there while supporting them, I think that's a good first session with that person. And then you'll be following up with those things more subsequent sessions down the track, follow as part of your follow-up plan.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think, they need to know that there are impacts, but we certainly don't want them to think that that's our main concern. Our main concern in that moment is we're worried about you. We want to check in with you. We want to make sure that you're okay because we need to build that trust, right? If they think that it's going to then lead to performance discussions or something, whether it does or not, that's certainly going to make it a bit more confronting for them. Okay, so what if they what if they lack insight into their own mental health? What if they are dismissive and say, no, I'm fine, I'm all good, but you maybe don't believe they're fine? What do you think we should be doing there?
Yeah, so we say as you progress, you kind of just have to be a little bit more assertive, a little bit more structured in what you do, depending on if the insight is not as good. So I think, for example, if we go back, you've had your initial conversation with the person and you've told them what you observed. Now you're going to hope that they're going to go away, maybe think about it, and then when you have your follow-up conversation, they're open to discussing some more with you and show some insight. However, if they don't show some insight, and especially if they're keeping on with the same behaviours of concern, then the second conversation is going to have to be a little bit different, and in which you're basically saying, well, this is what we observed, and so we recommend there's a particular way to do it. And this is, again, one of the handouts that we'll give for people, and something called DEAR, which is actually taken from dialectical behavioural theory, which is a type of from counselling. But I think it's actually really good when it comes to talking about PIPs or disciplinary matters, as well. And so I would recommend you follow something like the DEAR structure, where you actually describe the situation. So, for example, you would say, hey, Lisa, I spoke to you last week about some things that were observed. You're telling me now today you don't really think, that's really an issue. You're not concerned by that. So you're just describing the situation and what they say. So you're automatically showing that you understand their point of view. And so they can't dispute that. We met last week. They can't dispute that. I told you this. They can't dispute that. You're telling me now that that this is how you feel about it. They can't dispute that. So you're just setting the scene. So that's the D, to describe the scene. And then you go on to express how you feel about all of this. But unfortunately, since we spoke, I've had more people come to me and raise concerns, or I haven't noticed things have changed. And so you're expressing how you feel about it. So therefore, I'm going to have to do something about it. So you're just expressing that. And then the E, and then the A is you assert what you're going to do. So now I'm not sure, I can talk to you again, but if we're not on the same page with this, if you don't think there's a problem, whereas we feel there is some issues, we're going to have to do something about it. So I'll give you some time to think about what you want to do, or otherwise I can prescribe what we're going to do from here. Yeah? So that's the A. And then the R is reinforce it. So why should they listen? The message really is, this problem is not going to go away. You're going to have to do something about it. So we'll talk again, but there's going to be a consequence, And you do that, and you follow, and that's really quite structured to make sure that that's quite an assertive way to communicate, hey, we're going to have to address this issue, but you're also doing it in a respectful way, and you can do that alongside what we call the 7 Cs, where they always, act in this way when you're dealing with an employee. I'm sure most people do anyway, but you're obviously very calm. You're caring and that you're being respectful, to the person as a human. You're clear. So they shouldn't be leaving that meeting with you with any uncertainty that this issue is going to be addressed. That you're consistent. You're not saying one thing each time you see them. You're saying the same different thing each time you see them. You're saying the same thing. That you're imposing a consequence, which is something has to be done, and they do it in a confident way because you're in the right. You're not doing anything wrong. You've got no reason to doubt yourself. Yeah. So if you structured approach, it's going to hold the person to be account, and it's going to make it easier going forward with what you have to do to deal with the situation.
Yeah. Oh, that's really helpful. So I like that because I guess for me, and I know many of you on the call, our first instinct is to retreat. So we're talking mental health, retreat, this manager seems really stressed and overwhelmed. Oh, let's just back off. So I like this. We're being proactive, we're taking action, and we are ensuring that we can support them. So I like that.
And you need to tell yourself too, it's actually helping the person because, they're going to want to avoid doing something, which is natural human behavior. You're actually helping them get the help they need. You're not harming them by getting them to address their issue, really, and so you're actually helping them too. Even though it doesn't seem like they might show the appreciation in that sort of way, you are actually helping them.
Yeah, and what's they're saying, clear is kind. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is be really, clear with the requirements and your expectations.
Yes.
No, that's awesome. Thank you. Okay, that's really helpful. So let's jump into our next scenario. This one, so common. I feel like this would be the most common one and the most that those of us on the call had dealt with. When mental health comes up in a formal process. So let's say we have invited an employee to an investigation meeting, a disciplinary meeting. Maybe it's an informal meeting to discuss excessive absenteeism. Maybe we're having a performance discussion. and then the employee cites mental health as a reason. This is challenging because in that moment, we need to balance the needs of the employee with the needs of the business. So what are your thoughts on how we can support the employee but still manage our formal process requirements fairly and effectively?
Yeah, it's probably the most common situation we get with our manager hotline calls, actually. It's not either way. Yeah, totally. That's the number one scenario. So when people do call up our manager hotline series at Clearhead, we go step by step and take them through, because each case is obviously different depending on the situation. But the general rules, I think it's really helpful to talk to yourself. Tell yourself, look, I've got two roles here. Yes, I want to help support this person's mental health, but also I have to worry about performance and I have to worry about other people in the organisation. So that's okay to acknowledge that. And then secondly, I think, can be a big relief, is that, hey, this is a collaborative effort. It's not just for me, I have to sort this out. They have to as well. There's some responsibility on them. They're going to take responsibility for their own situation. It's not me doing it. And so this is a collaborative effort. So together, me and the employee, we're going to have to work this out together. So making the shared effort and taking the pressure up yourself, I think, helped a lot. And reminding yourself that you're within your rights to do it. So then how do you go, what you do next? Well, again, similar to when you're talking with somebody, maybe where there is a performance issues, you're listening to what they say, their interpretation of how the mental health is impacting on their work. You're listening with empathy. You're truly, really trying to understand it. But the information you're collecting is going to be something you're going to analyze and be a little bit critical with it to see, well, actually, is it linked or isn't it linked? And you're actually then going to put it back on them. Okay, all right. So you've said that it's because of your depression, that you struggle to get into work, that you struggle to concentrate, that you make a mistake. Okay, so let's talk about what treatment are you getting for depression, or how can we help you get your treatment addressed? Sorry, get your depression addressed, and so then over to them too. And so that's the approach to take, and step by step, you hold the person accountable. You put things in place while supporting them. You need to know there's some momentum going, and them addressing the problem that they is linked to the work performance.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I guess I can confidently say no matter where in the world you are practicing HR, I think it'd be fair to say that any point in a formal process when this gets introduced, it's a time to pause, right? We don't just be like, well, I actually, no joking, had a manager one time say, we're not here to talk about your personal stuff, we're here to talk about your performance, which is horrible. So I think it would be fair to say that we should pause, we should reflect, we should consider whether we need to reroute or, change tact. I think that's hugely important. And for us here in New Zealand especially, and I know it's very similar in Australia, our employment legislation says that we must do what is fair and reasonable in the circumstances. And this is very much a circumstance that we should be factoring in. So when we're in a process like performance, like disciplinary, like medical incapacity or absenteeism, whatever that looks like, if they bring this information, that is context that we absolutely need to be factoring into the fair and reasonable thing to do. So
that's right. And most of the times when I see people that have mentioned that they're a bit on special leave, or that actually the process has been paused, absolutely. And but rather than just sort of letting it drag on, I'm not sure what to do. Well, it's paused. That you could collect some information, you start building a plan, and we can talk some more if you want about some things that some people don't even think about putting together a workplace support plan where you actually, as part of it, we actually liaise with the counsellor, seeing the person. Again, it's collaborative thing, so you can bring in other people, which obviously all this is subject to the consent of the person, of course. But, assuming that the person wants to actually improve their mental health and wants to keep their job, then, the consent can take care of itself. There's trust in the relationship.
Yeah, nice. Okay. Another situation, I'm going to go here. It's an unfortunate one that we do face. I have faced many times before. I'm going to say it as nicely as possible, but how do we know if a disclosure is genuine? Because often, and I've had it happen to me before, we have people who I'm going to say, quote unquote, are pulling the mental health card. I, for example, had a disciplinary process. We had just shared a preliminary outcome of termination, and the person then came and said, actually, I didn't tell you, but I'm depressed and that's been impacting, that's why I did the thing that I did type thing. when we explored it further, the employee actually admitted that the union had told them to say that to help buy some time, which is horrific. So a union who's meant to be there supporting actually encourage an employee to lie and pull that card. So I guess my question is, how do we know if a disclosure is genuine or if somebody might be exaggerating or trying to pull that card?
Yes, I've actually heard that happened before myself. People are told to use a mental health card. Absolutely, unfortunately, it does happen. So I always recommend that you take it from the approach of being what we call the naive inquirer. So you kind of like, looks like you're taking it at face value, but you're really kind of inquiring more. Like, oh, okay, well, that must be difficult. Again, showing empathy around the saying they're depressed. But then you would ask us, tell me some more information. So you certainly the devil's in the detail, isn't it? The more detail you get, the better. So you'd be saying, okay, so we can certainly allow for that, but obviously we just need to get some information. So tell me, who diagnosed that, who's your treating person, and of course they won't have any of that. But most they are totally fabricated, and then the best they can come was a GP note, and so everyone says GP sometimes feel a lot of pressure. They hand over GP note, and it might say something person's depressed, a person's threat, and so you need to go beyond that and ask for some specialist information. And failing that, then you would ultimately get them assessed yourself independently for a fitness work assessment, and just go through those steps of naive, but also asking for more information and inquiring will sort of end that ruse in due time. And then at that point, the person again will have to be more accountable for what they're doing. There's a bit of a process to get them to that accountability, but you'll get there in the end.
Yeah, nice. And I think earlier you told us, let's look back to we've now got a disclosure. So we're following that same process. Employees disclosed it. Let's, I like to call it the kind of onus on adults. We're going to trust that people have positive intentions until we've proven that they haven't. And let's take it seriously. Let's ask the questions. Let's support them. Let's do what we need to do. What about when an employee blames a PIP process for their mental health breakdown? I've certainly had that. And my thoughts, and I'd love to hear yours, Barry, is here, especially in New Zealand, but here the laws are there to do the right thing by the employee. So if we follow our processes well, if we do all the right things, if we've been fair and reasonable, if we gave them opportunities to share any mental health challenges or anything, then, it's going to be case by case. But at the end of the day, if we're following the right process and we're justified in everything that we've done, then we just need to support them as best we can. But that shouldn't stop us from giving that warning or going through with that termination. If the justification is there for taking that action, then it's just about supporting them with the fallout of that. What would you say, Barry?
Yeah, well, obviously a PIP is stressful for everybody. Now, if people have too much stress, so people that have already got mental health issues have too much stress, it's possible that they could make them exacerbate their problems. So the broader question then is, are they actually fit to do their job or not? Because they're on a PIP because they've had some issues, and then the mental health is probably part of those issues, and then the PIP's making the mental health worse again. And then really logically, you have to say, well, are they able to actually do their job? So yeah, you definitely could pause the PIP, and then have them assess for their fitness to do their job overall. Get a specific clinical opinion up, and that's the question I get asked when I do the fitness to work assessment. Is it safe to carry on with this PIP or not safe to carry on with this PIP? And it's just sometimes there might be some particular circumstances around it, but most of the time it's just, they already have pre-existing mental health, which are not work-related, because that's the other issue too. And I think it's probably the same in just about every jurisdiction, that when it comes to work-related or not work-related, that's an important thing to establish when you get to the nitty end of people's mental health problems. And so if they're going to make those sort of claims at work, and the PIP in particular is causing my stress, then the clinical opinion would be around what is that other stuff that's causing it. And so you don't, you want to front foot this again. You don't just want indefinite sick leave and hope that they one day decide they want to come back to work and everything's going to be okay. Because there'll be another relapse. So you're really going to want to actually go through this process, but you might have to pause it. But it's really is a case of showing that why in particular is this PIP, what's the reason this PIP is making the mental health worse? Because it is stressful, of course it is, like that, but something people have to go through, just like redundancy, things that realities everybody has to face that are stressful for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we just always at every point of the process, anytime new information comes to light, anytime we're thinking of changing tact or confirming a decision or something, then we should be stopping and thinking about that as well. So that's really helpful. Thank you. We've got 2 minutes left. I'd love to chat now a little bit more about the escalation processes. We touched on it before. If we really genuinely have deep concern for an employee, how do we respect their confidentiality, but also know when it's necessary to intervene for their safety? What are your thoughts?
Yes, that's right. Well, as a general rule of thumb, we say always try and get agreement and consent every step of the process. I mean, it's not so much better if you can, even if you have to tell somebody and you're not, this is where it's not so severe a risk. Hey, can you go away and think about that and let me what you to do? I think that's still better than making a quick decision to go proceed without their agreement, without their consent. But there is going to be some scenarios where you're quite within your rights to do this. So one of the scenarios I can think of is where you've got someone right in front of you who's not guaranteeing your safety. You said they're going to leave workplace and they probably are going to harm themselves, but yet they don't want you to involve authorities. They're not agreeing to EAP call. They're not agreeing to you contacting the crisis line. They're not agreeing to a welfare check. Not agreeing to you contact a family member. Well, I think in those cases, you just explain it from your point of view. Hey, what am I, well, this is how I'm feeling. You realize from my point of view, I need to do something. I don't want to see you die. John, I don't want you to die. I don't want you to leave here and kill yourself. I'm going to have to do something about it. I'm not sure what else I can do because you're telling me you don't give me consent to contact anybody. So I think I'm going to have to do something against you. But hey, can we make it easy for both of us? Can we just get your consent? So again, even at that point, still trying to get their consent. But if worse comes to worse and they won't, then you just go ahead and you do what you have to do. And I think it'd be more than justified in a case like that. Another case would be, other employees are at risk or harm, in the workplace, and that they're not consenting to change something or to relocate or whatever. Yeah. And so again, you could go and you would have to be within your rights to go ahead and do it.
Yeah. Wow. That's such a tough one. And I guess, we have to make that call. I've been in situations myself, both in the workplace and personally, where I've struggled with that because they've come to you, they've trusted you, you're their safe space, and then it feels like you're breaking their trust if they don't want you. Like I had somebody who said, I don't want you to call my emergency contact. I just told you so I've got someone to speak to. I don't want you to do anything with this information. And I did. So how do we deal with that breaking of trust, and how do we, I guess, deal with that situation the best way possible so not to lose their trust?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, as I said, you may not know this, but you might know this. When you come to see a psychologist or a counsellor, right from the start, before we even do anything else, we always go through the limits of confidentiality and consent. And we tell people, if you tell me something that's actually going to, I'm concerned about, and but you don't want me to do so, that I am going to break confidentiality. So we talk about what's called the limits of confidentiality. So we make it clear right from the start. Now, of course, I guess HR people and managers don't do that. But I mean, one of the things I've often suggested in that situation is that when you feel that conversation's going into that territory, you could actually say to them, hey, you can carry on telling some more what's going on for you, but just bear in mind that I may not be the best person. If you want to load this on me, that's okay, but I might have to bring somebody else into it. And so, no, I don't want you to do that. Then you might say that if you can, and just sit them around and say, okay, well, maybe it's best if we refer to someone else, a professional person who can manage these issues of consult, consent and confidentiality, because I don't want, because you're going to put it on me. But then on the other hand, it's a human, you're not bound, you're not going to get in trouble so much as if I am. If I break their confidentiality, other than breaching the trust. But you know what I mean? So I think if you're a human-to-human interaction and you let them know, it's any sort of reasonable person will understand they can't dump all that on you and then expect you not to do it, And I think you just have to have the confidence yourself that you're doing the right thing. But it's not easy. I understand it's not easy, but at the end of the day, you can sleep at night knowing you did the right thing, essentially, in that case. If in doubt, call us up. Again, that's a manager hotline question. If in doubt, it's a bit grey, call us. You might say to the person, okay, well, I'm not sure what to do with this. Can you just hold here? I want to consult with somebody else about this. Jump on the phone, ring up our manager hotline service, we'll talk you through, then we can give you opinion. We think in this case whether it's justified to breach confidentiality, whether consent is needed or not. It's not a black and white, and this is not, you still know, a black and white area. We've everyone doing their best, and especially for those marginal cases, don't be afraid to get an opinion, reach out for help.
Yeah, wow. And you spoke about being able to sleep at night and stuff, and I'll attest, and I'm sure everyone on this call will, that we deal with some heavy, heavy stuff. And, for most of us in HR, it's kind of just becoming part of our job. And look, I know like people like yourself, Barry, who are, clinical psychologists or registered, that you have something called supervision, don't you? So you actually have people that you go to that support you, that you are required to. It's mandatory, isn't it, that you're required to as part of your registration, even monthly or more frequently, check in with someone to help you deal with the impacts of these things. We don't have anything like that in HR. So we carry a lot of this heavy stuff, and of course it doesn't happen anywhere near as regularly for us as it does for you, but when it happens, it's really, really heavy. And I actually, on a call last week with Barry, shared a example of a time in a workplace when I was navigating an employee suicide, and it was an employee suicide of someone that I was actually performance managing at the time. And when I was talking to Barry about it, I got upset, and I'm not even talking like a tear streamed down my face. I'm talking like I was ugly crying as I was recalling it. And I didn't even realize at the time how much that I had carried that and how much it impacted me. But it was a horrific, horrific time. The fallout from it, supporting the other employees, all of that kind of stuff. And we deal with some really, really heavy stuff sometimes. So I'd love to know, Barry, as we're wrapping up, we're supporting everyone else through some really heavy situations. How do we set healthy boundaries and practice self-care when we're having to deal with all of this stuff and we're maybe not, equipped to?
Absolutely. I've noticed one of the questions that's come through the chat is when we're working right from home, we don't have any team members around, to talk to. I mean, I think that's really important, isn't it? And so I think it's the number one thing. I'd encourage everybody to make sure you've got really good professional networks, even if you're not having formal supervision like we had to have what's called peer supervision, to find someone that you can pair up with and have an arrangement in place where you talk to each other with challenging situations you've got. Yes, a peer supervision, put that in place, a good professional network, and then access the support from us at Clearhead. We had this manager hotline service. We're here to help. Don't be afraid to access that service, as well as your own peer supervision and professional network. So that's the first thing I think you should do. Second thing, obviously, practice good self-care. I'm sure everybody knows that in theory, but is everybody doing it? So I would ask all the people on this webinar now, if I was to ask yourself, what are some, say, 3 non-work things that you do for yourself that, in terms of self-care, what are those things? If you can't name those things, that maybe that you don't have them, you need to think about, bringing in more self-care into your life. That's only going to help with your work. And then thirdly, you need to know your own limitations and vulnerability. And sometimes you just won't be feeling up to dealing with one of these difficult situations. That's okay. And acknowledging that. And even if you do get vulnerable during a session, like you mentioned crying, Lisa, I think that can be a very powerful thing. I'm not saying you get in the habit of crying when you're dealing with clients all the time, employees all the time, but it's not the end of the world if it happens. The employee's not going to go away thinking, that she's hopeless. She's going to feel that person, had a lot of empathy for me and they understood how I felt, And so I think that be real. You can't go wrong with being real. Again, it's a do no harm approach. But obviously, if it's happening a lot, you've got some vulnerability. You need to make sure you get some support for yourself, either EAP counselling or getting advice from us.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, we'll reinforce again, like EAP is there for us too in HR. It's often just a little poster on the back of a toilet cubicle or a little, wording at the end of our letter templates talking about EAP, but it's actually a real service that we can use and should be using. Marie said in the chat that she's often thought that supervision would be something fabulous for HR, and I totally agree. If only I had seen someone in the UK starting to really push this narrative of needing supervision. But, I personally, I've dealt myself, and in my only 10 years in HR, I've dealt with 3 suicides, 2 suicide attempts, bereavements in the workplace. I've dealt with self-harm in the workplace. And in those moments, my thinking was I needed to be the one that was strong. I needed to support everybody else. And I was running on adrenaline. I was working ridiculous hours, and I never even stopped to think until it was, we got through the end of it, how much that had been impacting me and how I had been, exhausting my staff trying to support everyone else. It's that whole, put your mask on before others. So Barry, if there's 1 or 2 things that you want people to take away today, what would that be?
Yeah, I think the first thing is you're not going to make any situation worse by front-footing it, by having these difficult conversations, asking questions and take action. It's not going to make anything worse by just listening, taking information down and making some plans. What will make things worse if you avoid the difficult conversations, delay or avoid them, and then if you have one, but then you don't follow up. So the employee comes, but then all these issues, you think it's all too much, I hope it just blows over. And it usually won't blow over, and the employee's going to be disappointed if you don't follow up as a field, and they're going to be expecting, especially if you said you're going to do it. So don't avoid, front put it, and make sure you follow up, take action. That's the first thing. And the second message I'll say is that there will be situations you don't feel comfortable and confident in handling. That's definitely the case. And that's when you remind yourself you don't have to deal with it alone. Reach out, as we keep saying today, reach out. Give us a call at Clearhead for a manager hotline support service. If you're a client of ours, we'll welcome new clients, by the way. We're always for new clients. Or make sure if you haven't got someone, everyone should hopefully have one person, a peer that they can pair up with and actually do informal supervision, if you like, and compare notes, compare ideas and get support from each other. And the other thing that's part of that too is that you might need to get real specific professional input in terms of a fitness for work assessment. You can ask real particular questions like, is it dangerous for me harmful for me to put a performance improvement plan in for that employee? We can help take the pressure off you him to make that decision. If you think, obviously, as Lisa's saying, if in doubt, you pause the process, but we can help you give the information and then you can restart the process again. So don't be afraid not only to get advice, but also use expert services like fitness for work assessments. And obviously also look after yourself as part of all that.
Yeah, I love that. And a big one there that you said is following up. And I think that's probably the most important of all. Even if you've stumbled through the conversation, even if you've been awkward or kicking yourself for saying all the wrong things, like follow up. Because the worst thing that could happen is they've trusted you, they've opened up to you, you said you'd do something, and then they get to the bottom of your to-do list and you forget or you don't follow up. And that's the worst thing you can do. Awesome. Well, for me, look, my takeaways is that, we're not always going to have the answers. That's okay. We just need to ensure that we know at least how to recognize red flags and ensure people get the right help. So for me, can we be proactive here? Can we do risk assessments? Like look at your business. What roles or teams or situations do you think mental health challenges might arise more in? Someone mentioned remote workers. There could be people who are very isolated in their role. There could be people who, the type of work that they do. I worked in a newsroom for a couple of years and they were exposed to some horrific news stories. Our editing department were exposed to some horrific video footage of tragedies that had taken place. And so for me, they were a higher risk to us that we identified. And I think also just prepare your resources so that when something comes, you've got a file with all the stuff you need. You've got your checklist, you've got your Clearhead references. How do you make sure that you are prepared? And I would say, if you have an EAP provider, which a lot of you have said that you do, take a moment today to jump on and understand what do they offer? What's available? How do we access it? Are we promoting it enough for our people? Do our people even understand what it is and what's available to them? And if you don't have one, build a business case for one. How can you show that mental health benefits for your business, for your retention, for your engagement, for your productivity? If you're a member in HRHQ, I'm always there to help you build a business case if you need to. And as Barry said, in HRHQ, if you remember, we're always there if you need to support or bounce or even just have a moment or have a cry, whatever that looks like. But yeah, I think we've covered a lot of really, really good stuff here. Thank you so, so much, Barry.
That's it for today's episode. If you want to learn more about how Clearhead can support your workplace, or you have a burning mental health question that you'd like us to explore on the podcast, check us out at myclearhead.com and drop us a message. Love our content? Share it with a friend or leave us a comment on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook. Thank you so much again for listening and catch you on the next one.